नमस्कार, गुड आफ्टरनून टू ऑल। प्रभु से खास बात कार्यक्रम दोस्तों 59 एपिसोड। आज हमारा 59 एपिसोड है प्रभु से खास बात। और इसमें हम नए नए विषय, नए टॉपिक लेके आते हैं जो लोगों को अवेयर करते हैं और अलग अलग टॉपिक होते हैं वो। तो आज भी एक यूनिक टॉपिक है और आज खास बसंत पंचमी है, जिस दिन माँ सरस्वती की पूजा होती है दोस्तों। एक खास ऋतु है बसंत ऋतु, और उस ऋतु से मौसम जो है का मिजाज है वो चेंज होता है। हमारे आज के जो कीनोट स्पीकर हैं प्रखर बेबाक एदरिज मिरांडा साहब, उनका स्वागत करता हूं मैं। मिरांडा सर, आपका स्वागत है। और दोस्तों, बसंत के आगमन से मैं यही कहूँगा, बसंत के आगमन से सरोबार मन, बसंत के आगमन से सरोबार मन करता है सहर्ष खुशियों का अभिनंदन, करता है सहर्ष खुशियों का अभिनंदन। हैप्पी बसंत पंचमी। आप सभी जो लाइव देख रहे हैं यूट्यूब पे दोस्तों, हमारे प्यारे प्यारे दर्शक, उन सभी का मैं इस हैप्पी बसंत पंचमी के साथ में स्वागत करता हूं। दोस्तों, खास सब्जेक्ट है प्रेस लॉ। आपने मीडिया, पत्रकारों, अखबार, समाचार पत्र, न्यूज चैनल में काफ़ी चर्चाएं, डिबेट वगैरह सुनी, लेकिन उनके लिए भी कानून है। उनमें किस तरह से क्राइटेरिया है, क्या है कानून, भारतीय कानून, उन सब विषय को लेकर प्रेस के जो कानून से, प्रेस के लॉ हैं, उनको हमारे प्रिंट मीडिया और इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया के आप बड़े अवेयर होंगे, एजुकेट होंगे। तो सबसे पहले मैं चाहूँगा आप इस वीडियो को लाइक करें। इस तरह से हमारे जो हाउसिंग गुरु रमेश प्रभु जी है, महाराष्ट्र सोसाइटी वेलफेयर एसोसिएशन और एमएनएस मीडिया न्यूज सर्विस रुकावट के लिए खेद है दोस्तों, इंटरनेट का इशू था, प्रॉब्लम था, इसलिए फिर से हम आपका स्वागत करते हैं। और आज के हमारे जो कीनोट स्पीकर हैं, इस विषय के जानकार और काफ़ी आपके जो पार्लियामेंट के जो इश्यूज हैं, किस तरह से आप वहाँ पे सवाल उठाना, असेंबली में सवाल उठाना, उन जनप्रतिनिधियों के सहायक रह चुके हैं, उनके एडवाइज़र रह चुके हैं। ऐसे हमारे महासेवा के प्रभु सा की टीम में के साथ में हैं मिस्टर एदरिज मिरांडा। मिस्टर एदरिज मिरांडा साहब का मैं स्वागत करता हूं और यही चाहूँगा कि आप इन से अवेयर हों, एजुकेट हों, और काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें आपको यहाँ पे जानने को मिलेगी, जो न्यूज़पेपर, अखबार और चैनल्स के लिए क्या क्या कानून है, क्या क्या एसओपी है, उनको भी एक दायरा है, वो दायरे के हिसाब से चलना पड़ता है। तो आगे के नॉलेज के लिए, आपको एक्सपीरियंस के लिए मैं मिस्टर मिरांडा अपने प्रेजेंटेशन पेश करेंगे। प्लीज़ वेलकम मिस्टर एदरिज मिरांडा।
Namaste viewers. Welcome to the program, our weekly program. I'll start with uploading a sort of block diagram which gives you a profile portrait of what exactly it is. Thereafter, I'll go into the details of it. As you can see that block diagram, as you can see the block diagram, it's divided into 3 columns. First is the registration, then next to that comes the periodic compliances, and then we have the regular day-to-day functioning of the media, the press and all the problems associated therewith. Now the registration part we will not lay much emphasis on it, because everybody is not going to start a newspaper or start a printing press. Nevertheless, you need a little profile idea about that. So under the heading registration, we have registration of a newspaper, where a person is required to fill various forms which are readily available, and then file some affidavits and give some other detail. All that annexed with a stamp, with a court fee stamp, is to be submitted to the Chief Metropolitan Magistrate of Court in the city of Bombay. But for other cities, I don't know what is the procedure. In Bombay, it is we have to submit that application there, which is scrutinized, and thereafter you get the registration of your newspaper. Then when we register the newspaper, we get a number. This is the registration number of a newspaper, whether it is daily, weekly, monthly, or whatever. Of course, that is that has become obsolete nowadays with the advent of social media, mobiles and other such devices. But still daily paper is just about surviving. About the monthly and weekly, forget about it. Then you have to give the details to be whether the newspaper will be published in English or some other language or whichever language. One also has to give the registered office address of the newspaper. This is very essential because tomorrow if there is some problem and government has to search you or government has to serve notice onto you, summons or warrant to arrest the publisher and printer, then your address is required because that is the place where that will be the authentic address registered and they'll try to trace you out over there. So your register office is an important address. Now we'll come to periodic compliances. Renewal of license to publish. This is something that is done every year. Renewal of license to publish, then 2 copies of every newspaper that is published are to be retained. The original copies are to be retained with the office of the register. Then again these periodic compliances. Besides that, the third point on the block diagram will be publication day, date, and time. Because we have to tell on which day it is being published, the date. Because on certain days, certain papers are not published. Some papers are not published on Sunday. Sometimes a paper is not published on 26th Jan. Sometimes a paper is not published on we can say when there is a national holiday. So there will be no copy of that paper. In order to maintain the data and the information properly, the day and date also has to be made, and in between there was something known as you can call it some evening papers. Some newspapers started publishing papers in the afternoon, some started publishing. So therefore time became important. And you have to mention the time, whether it is being published in a morning paper, whether it is in an afternoon paper, or whether it's an evening paper. Then came an important factor where the resident editor is an Indian or a foreigner. They had something known as a resident editor, big papers. And whether that person was an Indian or a foreigner was an important factor because of political and various other safety reasons for in order to maintain safety for the state, sovereign. Because if it was a foreigner, then lot of other factors would come into play. So it became essential to give the address of the editor, the name and address of the editor, and if the editor was a foreigner, his her residential address in India. Because if you had a foreign editor, you have a foreigner as an editor. If the government wants to prosecute him, how will the government trace him? If he has done something wrong, if he has deliberately done something wrong, or erroneously done something wrong, now how are you going to trace him? How are you going to start litigation against him? So there has to be a residential address in India. And then came a very important factor. After the terrorism and all that started, then the government made it mandatory to inform the source of funds. So they can keep track whether people are deliberately pumping money into the newspaper industry in order to foment trouble or otherwise, or whether it is a genuine business enterprise. Now let's come to the main subject that we deal with every day. Day-to-day working in press, people are most vulnerable to such acts such as contempt. Now contempt can be of 2 types, contempt of court and contempt of legislature. If it is contempt of court, again it can be divided into 2, civil contempt and criminal contempt. If it is legislature also, it can be divided into 2, civil contempt and criminal contempt. Now what is civil contempt? Civil contempt is refusal to do any order by the court or by the legislature. And criminal contempt would mean to abuse or belittle the legislature and speak ill about the legislature, things like that. Same thing with the court. To speak against the judge, to attack a judge, or to misbehave would amount to criminal contempt. Or interfering in the course of justice, that also would amount to. That has been defined. You find it in the Contempt of Court Act 1971. Contempt has been defined under section 2 for civil, and 2.3 Roman 1, Roman 2 and 3 for criminal. Then another vulnerable sector for press people, because they can fall victims very easily, is inciting violence against state. When I say state, I mean sovereign. Sometimes some people write something very vitriolic, some people write something very inciting, something that will stir up trouble or ferment trouble. So those press reporters or authors or writers or whatever you would like to call them, whatever nomenclature they would go under, the editors, the publishers, and everybody responsible in the entire chain become liable to be prosecuted for violence. That will come under the IPC. Then there is another sector which is very vulnerable too, where press people should remember. That's nudity, naked pictures of human beings, and this is something that we learn even in journalism, because one subject of journalism is law. They teach very little about law, nevertheless sufficient for a journalist. Things that are directly related to journalism and directly interrelated with law are taught in the course of journalism. These are such things such as whenever there is an incident, any accident or death or whatever, rape and things like that, and certain other issues, there are very delicate issues. In the event of a rape, the name of the victim is not to be disclosed. The frontal portion of a body of man or woman is not to be not to be depicted in any picture. Pictures always are taken at the most from the back, the rear portion, and front, breast, and other vital portions of the body, private parts of the body, are never to be disclosed in any newspaper. It will amount to an offence. Then we come to insulting or demeaning statements about women, against a particular community, against a caste, or against a particular lobby or region or whatever. If you write something very fermenting, something about Maharashtrians and versus some South Indians or whatever, or Gujaratis, or wherein you are playing and creating problem between two communities, that itself will amount to an offence. That also can amount to offence. That could come even under A, that inciting violence against state, or that could even come under C. Then we come to defamation. Defamation, as you all know, the definition of defamation. Defamation is to speak ill about others, or to lower the image of any person in the eyes of society, or in the eyes of his friends, relatives, colleagues, and things like that. And defamation again can be of two types. There is criminal defamation, there is civil defamation. In a civil defamation, at maximum you can do is sue the person who has written that article or report. Not only the writer, but also the editor and the publisher. In criminal defamation, it will be criminal prosecution under section 499, 500. 499 is the definition section with the exceptions, and 500 is the penalty punishment section. Describes the punishment. Now let us go into a little detail about starting with A. Again, I'll come back to A in the under the column regular day-to-day functioning. Inciting violence against state, oblique sovereign. This will come on. This can come anywhere between 141 to 153A of the IPC 1860. Not only that, it can even not just inviting violence, but even the probability of inviting violence can amount to an offence. An attempt to incite violence also can amount to offence. So you can be charged even if the offence takes place, you can be charged even if the offence does not take place but is likely to take place. So this is the unique feature of it. Normally offence in criminal law, offence is committed after the act has transpired, but in such cases offence can be committed if the act has transpired and even if it has not transpired but likely to transpire. Now let's talk about nudity. Nudity, nowadays you find a lot of this scantily dressed persons on social media, Facebook and some other, Instagram and this and that, and so many platforms are there. Actually it is an offence, but hardly anybody takes cognizance of it, hardly anyone complains. If at all anybody complains, police and various other authorities are reluctant to take a complaint, take a cognizable complaint and make out a case as such. Because the law is very fluid here. Nobody exactly knows what the law is. It is constantly changing. So on mobile phones, naked pictures that come, or scantily dressed, or various other advertisements for drugs, for medicines, purportedly medicine, I would say. So these advertisements are offensive. Some of the advertisements can be controlled to the Advertising Council, which is a body, of course not a statutory body, nevertheless it is a regulating body for advertisements. And most of the people in the business community have recognized it and are controlled by it. What constitutes an offensive ad is decided by them. Besides this, you can, even if you have a grievance regarding offensive advertisements or otherwise offensive material in the paper, there are two other institutions that look after this. One is the Press Council of India, which is located in Delhi. The other is the Editors Guild, GUILD, Guild. So both these institutions have control over what can be printed, what cannot be printed, what pictures can be shown and what cannot be shown, things like that. And they will initiate proceedings. Now, the Press Council of India is a statutory body which always has a retired judge, retired Supreme Court judge as on its committee, besides having other people of repute. So these are institutions that we would, 1 minute. Nudity would come under section 292 of the IPC. And nudity would even mean not just showing anything, a new person, man or woman, even a caricature would amount to an offensive picture in that context. Now that will depend on the skills of the prosecuting agency and on the on the defense advocate. What would one man's food is another man's poison. What might appear to offensive to me might not be offensive in law. Or some ingenious advocate would bring out some sort of defense, some unique type of defense which may be appreciated by the judge. So what happens, what are the results cannot be foretold, you see. What I think is nude and offensive, if I complained, does not necessarily mean that my complaint is the gospel truth. It might appear offensive to me, but it is not offensive in the eyes of law. And that if the defense advocate can convince the honorable court, he succeeded. So, see, in the press, the Press Act has a little bit of, the media law has a little bit funny way of sending notices. Normally, when we send a notice, we send a notice to the person who has committed an offense, who we can call offender. Suppose I am the writer of a particular article and I have written something that constitutes an offense as defined in law. Of course, the definition of offense you will find in section 2N of the CRPC, and which corresponds to section 40 of the IPC. Besides that, it has been defined in various places, in various books and various laws differently. Now we will confine ourselves to this offense as defined in IPC and CRPC. Offense is committed when an act is done which is prohibited by law. An act prohibited by law, if it is committed, it is offense of commission. And a particular act which is mandated by law and we fail to do it is an offense of omission. So offenses are of two types. Now let us talk about offense. Suppose I have written something in the paper which is offensive about two communities, running them down, criticizing them unnecessarily. That will amount to an offense. Now if a notice has to be served, obviously notice is served to a person who does the wrong. Here I am the writer. It has been written under my byline, so I should be prosecuted. But no, in press, in media laws, the writer is prosecuted, the editor is prosecuted, and the publisher is prosecuted. So when you send a notice, the addressees to whom you address it should be the editor, the writer, the editor, and the publisher. All three separate addresses. No notice can be one. In the ending paragraph, you are required to give. First, you describe what is wrong, what you perceive to be done, what wrong you perceived has been done to you. Thereafter, you give the facts. And in the ending paragraph, obviously you have to mention, like we close up all notices, you are called upon, but here you are called upon to explain or to rectify or to give me an opportunity of being heard or projecting my side or printing my views, etc. Here there is an option. You are required to do this. You are required to tender an apology, or you are required to tender an unqualified apology, or you are required to tender an apology in the manner and the manner and in the place on the page which you carried the news. There are various riders to it. Some people insist that if you are carrying a correction, when you send your notice, you say that if you are in the event of you carrying a correction, it should be on the right hand top portion of the newspaper, or on page number so and so, or in the editor's column, or it should be an unqualified apology, or it should be an this, or it should be that, whatever. Or you may carry my version if you are not carrying an apology. And various conditions can be imposed, failing which my client shall initiate proceedings, criminal and civil proceedings against you, criminal, civil and other legal proceedings. against you all, or against. So your notice goes to three people: the publisher, editor, and the writer. It gives an option whether to tender apology, whether to tender an unqualified apology, whether to carry a correction, or whether to carry your version. You have many options. Failing which, legal proceedings shall be initiated within a period of so many days from receipt of the notice, etc. So now if you are starting civil proceedings, your name has been tarnished in society, you are starting civil proceeding, you will proceed under the law of torts for damages, claiming damage to the tune of hundreds or thousands or lakhs or whatever, or crores or rupees, whatever you think you are worth, and whatever you envisage what damage has been done to your image. Of course, you will have to establish that your image is such that this kind of damage has been caused, and you have to quantify as to how you arrive at that figure. You must justify. You cannot be a man on the street, some beggar, and claim crores of rupees. If you are an industrialist or a politician or some reputed professional, then you can claim, of course. So you have to establish in your petition, plaint, complaint, whatever it is, that you are a person of repute, you have got education, you have got good contacts, you have got wide contacts, etc. And this sort of damage has been done, which is perceptible from the conduct of other people while dealing with you pursuant to the publication that came in the paper, and therefore you have sent a notice which notice was received, duly received, but not acted upon. As such, you become entitled to claim these damages. Now, if you are going for criminal, again you have to show how you have to project the good side of yourself. Normally, people are not required to, in other matters, people are not required to project the good side of themselves. You are required to establish that a person has done something wrong. You are required to establish that your credibility, that you are worthy of this respect, and that you fail to get this respect and honor, and your image has been soiled in society or among colleagues, among friends, among acquaintances because of this publication.
Yes, thank you very much.
Finish?
ब्रेक छोटा सा वक्त हो चला एक छोटे से ब्रेक का, और ब्रेक के बाद हम जानेंगे एक्सपर्ट हमारे एदरिज मिरांडा साहब से कि और इसमें प्रोसीडिंग क्या होती है और क्या डेफर्मेशंस और अन्य कुछ सवाल हैं लोगों के, या हमारे सवाल, वो सवाल भी आप पूछ सकते हैं। एक छोटे से ब्रेक के बाद फिर से हाजिर होते हैं आपके साथ। अब बात करेंगे ऑन फेक न्यूज़ ऑन भारत में फेक न्यूज़ पर क्या कानून है। बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट इश्यूज़ है ये। फेक न्यूज़ से बड़ी भ्रामक जानकारी होती है, लोग काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें हो जाती है, यहाँ तक कि दंगे भी हो जाते हैं, तो जातिवाद वो सब चीज़ें होती है। तो हम फेक न्यूज़ पर भारत में क्या कानून है फेक न्यूज़ पर, वो बताएंगे मिस्टर एदरिज मिरांडा।
Yeah, let's come to a subject about fake news, which is a very hot subject nowadays. It's going viral all over on various devices, channels, mobiles, etc. There is no such specific fake news. You have to put. Oh yeah, there is no such specific codified law against fake news in India. There is there is a free publication of news under Article 19 of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of speech. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom to say just anything under the sun. There are some restrictions. Freedom doesn't mean freedom in that context, because Honorable Supreme Court has defined time and again that freedom doesn't mean just about anything. Everybody thinks that freedom, people on the street think that freedom means I can say anything about anybody, anywhere, anytime, anyhow. It's not like that. The freedom is a limited freedom, it has riders. Besides that, freedom is also controlled, or speech is also controlled by the Information Technology Act, the Disaster Management Act, and certain sections of the Indian Penal Code, IPC. These provisions are Section 66D of the Information Technology Act, which says, whoever by means of any communication, device, or computer resource cheats by impersonating shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 3 years, and shall also be liable to fine, which may extend to 1 lakh rupees. That is as far as the Information Technology Act is concerned, Section 66D. Now let us examine the Disaster Management Act. Now that this COVID is going on and things like that, this Disaster Management Act has come into the limelight. Otherwise it was an act only on paper, kept in the cupboards. So now we have Section 54. Whoever makes or circulates a false alarm or warning as to disaster or its severity or magnitude leading to panic shall be punished with imprisonment which may extend to 1 year or fine. So here you have which may extend to 1 year or fine. So if you are charged with this and brought before the court may either punish you with any imprisonment for 1 day or for either for 1 hour or for 1 year, or you may be fined. It's not necessary you have to be punished, because there is or. Then you have 505 bracket 1 of the IPC. Whoever by making, publishing or circulating any statement, rumor or report which may cause fear for an alarm to the public or to any section of the public shall be punished with imprisonment which may extend to 3 years, or with fine, or with both. So here, if you are charged with this section, the magistrate can give you punishment, imprisonment, and he can also impose fine, both. And then we have Section 153 of the Indian Penal Code. Whoever malignantly or wantonly, by doing anything illegal, gives provocation to any person intending or knowing it to be likely that such provocation will cause the offence of rioting to be committed, shall, if the offence of rioting be committed in consequence of such provocation, be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine, or with both. And if the offence of rioting is not committed, with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 6 months, or with fine, or with both. So besides this, we also have various other sections. Like in the Bombay Police Act also, there is a section that can punish you for inciting violence, for creating turmoil, or possibility of creating turmoil, you can be charged with section 110 to 110 and to 12, and there are some other sections which says that. So now there is a little bit of confusion here. When issues crop up, such issues crop up, and a complaint has to be filed. Sometimes police are reluctant to accept the complaint, sometimes they do accept the complaint. The matter is sent to court, either to the police or a private complaint is filed. And the question that arises is, what is the evidence that the prosecution has? Whether it's the state is prosecuting or whether private party is prosecuting, what constitutes evidence and what will constitute good evidence? Now, evidence after this, mobiles, computers and things like this have come, other devices. Now, the law of evidence has changed slightly. There is a slight insertion by way of section 65A of the Evidence Act. (65A) touches upon electronic evidence. Electronic evidence is some evidence that is stored in a pen drive or some CPU or some other such device, magnetic device. There are various types of devices. This electronic evidence is in the form of what you would call Boolean algebra. People who have done electronics engineering will know about it. It is in a digital form. You cannot get it. It is not a sort of hard copy, a paper or some photo or something. Normally a photo would be evidence, a paper would be evidence, but here it is in the form of digital form. It is stored in dots, dashes and things like that. Like you have the Morse code, dot dash, which was used many years ago for shipping and things like that. Because voice could not, the possibility of voice being communicated to large distances was not possible some 30 years back. People used to speak from shore, which was sent to a satellite, and then it reflected back to earth onto a wireless which was on the ship. So that was the means of communicating. And that communication was not always very satisfactory. Sometimes you could not hear things properly if there was a storm, if there were clouds, and for various other reasons, bad weather. Communication was not so effective. The clarity wasn't there. Therefore, things worked out at that time. But now with the advent of voice communication and internet, there is a clarity. You can actually phone and hear the voice and direct communications. Sometimes communication is from a satellite. Sometimes communication is some other way. But there are various, those who have done telecommunication engineering will understand much about that. We shouldn't go into the technicalities of that. Nevertheless, people communicated now they communicated with electronic devices and in a digital mode. So this digital mode of communication is rather very novel and new to our Evidence Act. And a section has been inserted. Section 6, as I said, section 65A, I think, yeah. Yeah, section 65A, I am correct. So, now when a matter goes to court and we need the evidence, and you try to get the evidence out by a printout from the printer. What is in the computer comes out from the printer, obviously. When you press a button and we give the print command, a sheet of a document would come out, a sheet would come out carrying that information, or a picture would come out carrying that information. Or you have stored it in a voice form, you have stored it in a picture form, or you might have stored it in a word form. Okay. What you are getting actually in reality is secondary evidence and not primary evidence. Now some advocates have been arguing, what do you mean by, and some judges also are of the opinion, what do you mean by secondary evidence? Sometimes some judges insist, I want the original document. Now just for a purpose of intellectual exercise, I don't mean to belittle anybody, let us agitate our brains and exercise and move and utilize our gray cells and argue with ourselves. What would constitute original document? As per section 62, original document are required in evidence. Section 62 talks about secondary evidence. Section 63 talks about secondary evidence. Primary evidence is section 62. Primary evidence is section 62, secondary evidence section 63. Now, will this document constitute primary evidence or secondary evidence? Because what comes out from the computer is only a printout. The original is in the computer itself. So, what in effect you are getting is secondary evidence, whether secondary evidence can be treated at par with primary evidence, and whether that stand has been taken at the inception of the case, that the primary evidence won't be available. So, these are factors that we need to look upon. Now, sending pictures by mobile, merely transmitting the picture or forwarding the picture, that also constitutes offence. Now, these things are more or less controlled. The government doesn't have control over this because it is the internet and various other platforms, Facebook and some other platforms like what do you call that? There are various other platforms, Instagram, yeah, etc. And most of these are located in foreign countries. They originated from foreign countries, and they have access. But to an extent, government also has some mechanism by which government can regulate, meaning physically regulate. Government, there are ways of blocking waves. So if you want to block the waves of those foreign platforms from coming into Indian territory, there are means to do that. But then that would infringe upon communication. Because again there is a complexity that India is a signatory to the United Nations Charter, and there should be free communication as per Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Besides human rights and other declarations, India is also signatory to communication law, and India is signatory to various other statutes and treaties. So therefore, we have to look at it from the international law point of view. We have to look at it from the constitutional point of view, Indian Constitution, and we have to look at it from various other points of view. So it is not so simple as that. Government has a mechanism which government can utilize, and they do utilize at times. And some people criticize the government. That is not the subject here. I am not for or against anybody. My job is just limited to saying what is available and what isn't available. So, okay, 1 minute. Yeah. Now about this medicines that are being and certain other supposedly medical what you would call tonics and things like that, wherein false averment is made. You consume this or you inhale this or you apply this and you will be physically well or you will enhance your uh, sterility, this thing, that thing, that thing. It goes on and on and on. Now these are offenses, but these offenses are controlled. Earlier it came on the cable TV, then it came on channels. Now also it is coming on channels. On channels they have some restriction. The channels are controlled by the state, by the Union of India, Ministry of Communication. They have a control over the channels to an extent. But Facebook and other mobile devices, there is no control. This is a very grey area and needs contemplation. I can talk and talk on the subject, but I would, as my learned friend says, the time is running out.
Yes.
Earlier we had something as a Cable Television Regulation Act, and there is a Advertisement Standard Council of India, and there are various other anti-indecency and anti-obscenity provisions are there. Various other provisions are there, but we will look into that some other time. Thank you.
थैंक यू मिस्टर एदरिज मिरांडा साहब, आपने बड़ा ही अच्छा एक टॉपिक, ऐसा एक्सक्लूसिव टॉपिक था कि लोग अवेयर हो, एजुकेट हो। दोस्तों आप सब लोग अवेयर हो, एजुकेट हो और ये सब चीज़ें जाने कि प्रेस काउंसिल ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट 1978 क्या है उसके बारे में बताया। केबल टेलीविजन रेगुलेशन एक्ट 1955 अमेंडमेंट हुआ है 2006 में, केबल टेलीविजन रेगुलेशन एक्ट में साहब ने बताया। और स्टेब्लिश द ASCI एडवर्टाइजिंग स्टैंडर्ड काउंसिल ऑफ इंडिया 1985। तो ये तमाम कानून है, लॉ है, लेकिन इन लॉ को कैसे इस्तेमाल किया जाए, अभी आपको यदि पीपीटी चाहिए तो आप हमें मेरे नंबर पर व्हाट्सअप करें। आपको करना सिर्फ व्हाट्सअप या मेरे ब्रॉडकास्ट ग्रुप में ऐड हो जाना है, ताकि आपको इस तरह की अवेयरनेस के जो हम कैंपेन चलाते हैं, अवेयरनेस करते हैं ऐसे एक्सक्लूसिव सब्जेक्ट पे, हाउसिंग सोसाइटी, रीडेवलपमेंट, तमाम विषय पे, तो आपको मिलती रहेगी जानकारी मेरे ब्रॉडकास्ट ग्रुप के थ्रू। आप मेरे ब्रॉडकास्ट ग्रुप में ऐड हो सकते हैं। मेरा नंबर है 9920378133। और किसी भी प्रकार की हाउसिंग से रिलेटेड या लॉ से रिलेटेड आपको क्वेरीज चाहिए, मिरांडा साहब से संपर्क आपको करना है, तो आप नीचे नंबर हमारे सहयोगी ने शेयर किए हैं। महासेवा, महाराष्ट्र सोसाइटी वेलफेयर एसोसिएशन, प्रभु साहब का जो प्रभु एसोसिएट है, उनके नंबर पर अंधेरी ऑफिस में आप संपर्क कर सकते हैं। अंधेरी ऑफिस के नंबर चैट बॉक्स में, लाइव चैट बॉक्स में शेयर कर चुके हैं हमारे जो सहयोगी हैं अविनाश सिंह उन्होंने। और दोस्तों इतने इम्पोर्टेंट कानून है, लास्ट में हमारे सब तमाम लोग देख रहे हैं, क्योंकि एक्सक्लूसिव सब्जेक्ट है, लोगों से अलग सब्जेक्ट है। लोगों ने पसंद किया है। आर सुंदर राजन साहब जो लाइव जुड़े हैं, उनके कमेंट से लाइक किया उन्होंने। कृपा कोरे साहब, जावेद सैयद साहब नासिक से, नेक्सस अंकल साहब हैं जो हमेशा हमारे रेगुलर वो हैं, प्रफुल्ल जटार साहब हैं, मोना मेहता, विवेक ठाकुर, किशोर मिर्चंदानी साहब, कृपा कोरे, सुनील कोरे साहब हैं, किशोर मिर्चंदानी, सभी लोग, आप सभी का धन्यवाद। और ऐसे ही इस वीडियो को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा शेयर करें, लाइक करें दोस्तों। लाइक करेंगे तो हमें पता चलेगा मिरांडा साहब का जो अवेयरनेस का जो प्रेजेंटेशन है वो आपको पसंद आया। और मैं यही कहूँगा आप सभी लोगों से। और जाते जाते एक सवाल लूँगा, टाइम है 4-5 मिनट, तो जो अभी बीच में जैसे अब न्यूडिटी, नग्नता की जो बात है, जो उसके लिए कानून है, और आए दिन कुछ न कुछ ऐसे मामले कोर्ट में जाते हैं और उस पर बंधन होता है। अभी हाल ही में एक बड़े एक्टर हैं जो यूथ आइकॉन है, उनका एक बड़ा ब्रांड, अंडरगारमेंट का बड़ा ब्रांड है, जो एड चल रहा था, किसी ने कोर्ट में, हाई कोर्ट में वो याचिका की और याचिका सफल हुई, उनको एड बदलना पड़ा। तो न्यूडिटी जो है, नग्नता है, उस पर जो कानून आप उसमें जाएंगे और उससे रिलेटेड आप करेंगे तो आपको निश्चित ही न्याय मिलेगा। तो बहुत सारी ऐसी अपील अभी हाल ही में किया हुआ है। ये एक बड़े एक्टर हैं, उनके पिताजी डायरेक्टर भी हैं, तो बड़ा ब्रांड है ये अपना अंडरगारमेंट्स का, उस पर उन्होंने बंद करवाया। सभी चैनल्स पे ऐड छाए हुए थे, वो ऐड बंद करवाया। तो आप एज ए कंज्यूमर, एक उपभोक्ता, प्रिंट मीडिया, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया, जितने चैनल्स हैं, इंटरटेनमेंट चैनल रहने दो, न्यूज़ चैनल दो, यदि कुछ चीज़ें ऐसे चलती है तो आप ब्रॉडकास्टिंग कानून है, प्रेस काउंसिल ऑफ इंडिया है, केबल टेलीविजन एक्ट है, तो उसमें जाके आप कैसे कर सकते हैं। हमारे पीपीटी चाहिए मिरांडा साहब का, तो आप ले सकते हैं। और आगे के लिए मैं यही कहूँगा, आप सभी इस वीडियो को लाइक करें, शेयर करें। और सबसे पहले हमारा जो कल का प्रोग्राम है, कल 12 बजे ठीक हमारा बड़ा ही अच्छा इंटरेस्टिंग प्रोग्राम है। निर्मला सीतारमण जी ने जो बजट पेश किया है, यूनियन बजट, उस पर बड़ा ही फेवरेबल और अनफेवरेबल पॉइंट्स क्या है यूनियन बजट 2022 के, वो बताएंगे एक्सपर्ट, तमाम जानकार। और हमारे सीए विमल पुन्मिया, आपके मुंबई के आपके एक्सपर्ट हैं और जानकार हैं विमल पुन्मिया साहब, वो कल बताएंगे। तो आप जरूर जुड़े ठीक 12 बजे। यदि आपको इन्विटेशन इसका चाहिए तो मुझे मेरे नंबर पर व्हाट्सअप करें, मेरा नंबर आपको मैंने चैट बॉक्स में शेयर कर दिया है। तो कल फेवरेबल और अनफेवरेबल दोनों पॉइंट्स बताएंगे सीए विमल पुन्मिया। तो जरूर आप 12 बजे ठीक जुड़िए। और आज के लिए इतना ही। और आगे इस पीपीटी की रिक्वायरमेंट्स, आपका प्रेजेंटेशन मिरांडा साहब की, तो मेरे नंबर पर व्हाट्सअप करें। और मिरांडा साहब से यदि कांटेक्ट करना चाहें तो आप महासेवा के नंबर पर नीचे जो शेयर किए उस पर कर सकते हैं। आज के लिए इतना ही। मिरांडा साहब, आपका खूब खूब धन्यवाद।
Thank
ऐसे ही
you.
एक्सक्लूसिव सब्जेक्ट लाते रहिए, हम रूबरू होंगे। और आप इस वीडियो को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लाइक करें तो हमें पता चलेगा कि इस वीडियो में जो आपने इस पे प्रेजेंटेशन किया है हमारे मिरांडा साहब ने, वो बहुत बेहतर हुआ और बेस्ट हुआ। इस तरह के कमेंट्स भी करें और वीडियो को लाइक करें, शेयर करें ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा। और चैनल महासेवा न्यूज़ आप हाईलाइट करें, महासेवा न्यूज़ और महासेवा वेबिनार, जो 2 चैनल्स हैं हमारे, वो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें। आप सब्सक्राइब करेंगे, आपको लेटेस्ट जो अपडेट है वो सब आपको मिलती रहेगी, आपके मेल आईडी पे आपको अपडेट होती है यूट्यूब पे। तो आज इतना ही। प्रभु से खास बात में मुझे यानी सुनील शर्मा को, आपके होस्ट और दोस्त को दीजिए इजाज़त। नमस्कार, थैंक यू, धन्यवाद।